Welcome to our keynote for the 2022 dinner party hosted by the Women of Halton Action Movement. I'm Karyn Byrne, a member of the steering committee, and I'm really excited to speak with our guest, Ancilla Ho-Young. Ancilla was an early trailblazer and advocate for equality and diversity in Halton. She was an active member of the Ontario Nurses Association for 20 years and served in many local union leadership positions where she was an outspoken voice for better pay and working conditions for nurses. Beyond her work at Joe Brant Hospital, she's been a fierce and vocal supporter of women, and especially women of color. Ancilla was born in Trinidad and educated in England before eventually making her way to Canada and settling in Burlington. She's received numerous awards for her work in the community, including an award from the Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers of Ontario for community involvement, a Sesquicentennial Award for community service, the John C. Holland Award for bringing Black history events to Burlington, and the Ontario Medal for Good Citizenship Burlington Citizen of the Year. We are so fortunate to have her with us for the dinner party this year, and I'm delighted to welcome her to our virtual keynote interview. Ancilla, welcome.
Thank you.
The theme of our event this year is feminism, past, present, and future. So let's start with your upbringing in Trinidad. How did your life there set the groundwork for your future as an outspoken advocate for women and girls?
Well, in order to answer that, I would have to start from the real beginning, which is Trinidad is a little island situated on the tip of South America, and it was a British colony. And so everything we did was influenced by the British, including the fact that it was a patriarchal society. Girls did not do anything other than got married, have babies. But my dad was a different person, because he said to us kids, there were 6 of us in the family, he said, I don't think I'll ever have enough money to leave you wealthy, leave you a large inheritance. He said, what I can do is make sure you get an education, because an education, no one can take that from you. So I think he basically broke the rules of the village where we lived. So he allowed the girls, being me, being the first child in the family, to go to high school. I looked at my dad, and he was a sugarcane farmer, and that was seasonal work, and he was not rich by any means. But I looked around my neighborhood, and there were lots of girls like me. So what we did, or what I started to do, was encourage these girls to let's get together and do things. And we formed a women's group, believe it or not. We taught each other how to cook. We invited the National Film Board to come and bring film to the community. And we didn't have electricity in the neighborhood in those days. Just kept pushing and pushing. And when I graduated from high school, from a high school which was actually interesting, it was an all-girls school. I won a scholarship to go there, and the principal was Canadian.
Oh, wow. Oh, nice little
and her name was Miss Scrimger, and I remember her well. It was an excellent time in my life. I met a lot of other students from different backgrounds. Some were rich, some were poor, like me. But we were all on equal footing in the school. And I used to read a lot. And I read a lot about England and the availability of the opportunities to go there. And somebody, I can't remember who, gave me a magazine, and in that magazine, I found advertisements for nursing students. When I graduated, I wrote a letter to the school, and I got a response, and they accepted me. So I said to my dad, I'd like to go to England to study nursing, because I always knew I wanted to help people. I believe my upbringing and where I lived and looking at how the other people were living, because I did not want to be married and have babies at that young age, because I knew that was what was going to happen. So I think that set the groundwork for me. Some of the friends that I had, I encouraged them, and I actually helped them to come to England by getting them the information, sending them the information. And when they came to England, to the residents. I made sure that I made them feel welcome and introduced them to all my friends.
So your dad was, for a patriarchal society, he was a bit of a feminist.
I suppose you would say that.
Well, he encouraged his daughters to go to school.
Yes.
And I'm sure he was incredibly proud of you when you did go to England. So
yes.
Tell me about what that was like in England and the change from Trinidad to, being in England and school. And what were some of the highlights of your time there and some of the challenges?
When I left to go to England, I knew no one. I was going to a place where I knew absolutely no one. So I got to Heathrow Airport and took a bus to the train station, the main train station. I got out from the train station and there were taxis waiting. And I said to the taxi driver, I need to get to the hospital in Warwick. And he said, no problem. He took me there. And he rang the bell and announced that he brought me there. They were waiting for me, actually.
Awesome.
And that was how my life started.
And that's how it all began. So what were some of the rules about being a nurse at that time? I can't imagine how different it would have been from today.
Yes. Well, we lived in residence, and the residence was all army barracks that were turned into living quarters. Living in residence was absolutely wonderful. Wonderful. We made it wonderful because when I got there to England, there were students from all over the world.
So it was a very diverse
group. It was very good, yes. We all helped each other.
So you didn't think anything different about it being diverse as a woman of color?
Yeah, there were other students like myself there, and the thing that I found different was difficult to deal with was the food. Sunday was always in our family in the islands. Sunday was a day when family got together and you had a big meal. And I got to England and that was the weirdest part. On Sunday evenings for dinner, we would have hot mashed potatoes, lettuce, and cold cuts. Well, didn't apply to me because I couldn't eat any of that.
So was it easy to fit in there, coming from Trinidad, living in England? I mean, not just in school, but outside. What was that cultural change like for you? Well,
no one made me feel unwelcome because in England at that time, being part of the British colony, anybody coming from the British colonies or the Commonwealth, as it were, could easily move back and forth because you didn't really have to apply to immigration to get there. You belong there. And when I got to the hospital, there were other people that looked like me. So I felt I just fit right in. So eventually you decided, you finished your education and you decided to move to Canada. And so how was that transition from Trinidad to the UK and then to Canada? How was that different? It was different, very different, because you were assigned to work alone in Canada, whereas in England, you never worked alone. There was always somebody with you. So you didn't have to lift patients by yourself or do any of the chores by yourself. There was always two people working together. Was that when you wanted to get involved with advocating for better working conditions and those sorts of things? The person who was the nurse manager on the unit, she was British. So she wasn't involved in my hiring at the hospital. It was the human resources department. So I was hired and assigned to her unit. And that was a disaster because once I got there and she realized I had just come from England, she felt threatened. She thought I might come and want to take her job away from her. But I have never been interested in becoming a manager. No? No, never.
And why is that?
Because you have to toe the party line, and I'm not a party line person.
Well, we definitely know that about you. You've been very outspoken for women, and especially women of color, and been very active with the nurses union. So what were some of the challenges that you faced as a nurse, in particular, first when you came?
Well, I found out when I moved to Burlington and started at the hospital, there were not many people that looked like me. And I found that the patients were not terribly receptive to having a person of color taking care of them. There was a patient I was assigned to take care of, and when I went to check in with him, I said, I'm so and so, and I'm going to be taking care of you. And he said, I don't want you to take care of me. So I said, why is that? So he said, well, I want a proper nurse. I said, what do you mean by a proper nurse? And he didn't answer me. I said, oh, did you mean a white nurse? He said, yes. And then his doctor came in at the same time. His doctor was a person of color like myself from South Africa. And as he walked in, the patient had just thrown his breakfast tray at me.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And the doctor said to him, well, I guess you're feeling well today, so we're going to send you home.
Oh my goodness.
Because you don't treat the nurses like this. So
so you did have some support, a little bit of support,
yes.
maybe? Yeah. But I mean, obviously coming to Burlington, being a person of color, a woman, that at that time, it must have been very different from the UK.
Yeah, it used to be funny when I went to the stores and I would see a person of color. I would think, oh, there's somebody else that looks like me. And at the hospital, there were very few. I think there was only about maybe 2 or 3 of us.
And so you've established a group for people of Caribbean descent. What was that about, and is it still operating?
It still is, yes. It's the Burlington Caribbean Connection. And I wasn't actually responsible for starting it. Someone else did. But she retired and went back to the Caribbean, passed the torch on to me since 2000. And I've been sort of the lifetime president. Because every time I say I'm going to step down, nobody would listen to me. So it is a cultural group, and we have members from anywhere in the Caribbean. And if you are not from the Caribbean, but you believe in what we're doing, you're free to join us as well. And we've had some members from the white community that have joined us. They love having fun with us. So we do fundraising, we give out scholarships, and we fundraise. And we raised more than $25,000 to the Joseph Brown Hospital. We have a room at the hospital named for the group. That's one of my passion, one of the groups I really love.
It sounds like it must be a fun time.
Yes. Well, we always have social events. That's how we promote our culture, through social events, and we do fundraising at the same time. Unfortunately, COVID has not been good to us. We have not been able to meet or do any fundraising, but we still connect.
Coming back to your work at Joe Brandt and some of the challenges at that environment, you became really active in the Ontario Nurses Association. What were some of the reasons why you decided to get involved there?
Well, the first thing I did was file a grievance because the same British manager, she kept treating me differently from other nurses. She would make sure I got the heaviest assignment. She would assign me to work the night shift mostly. And well, when I came from England, I came with experience. I mean, I had worked in so many places. And the majority of nurses on the unit at that time were nurses who had only been through the 2-year diploma training. So whenever there was anything to do that required my skills, they would call me. But other than that, I would be assigned to work the night shift and given all the heaviest patients. So when I questioned her as to why this was happening, she said, oh, you're too sensitive and you're complaining too much. And so I accessed the union. I found out we had a union at that time. Somebody invited me to go to a union meeting. And I went, and I used to go every month to the meeting. And then I filed a grievance for racism and discrimination because that's what it was.
Mm-hmm. And was that one of the first grievances of its kind?
That was one of the first grievances, as far as I can recall, that the Ontario Nurses Association filed using the terminology racism and discrimination. because that was in the 70s and there was no language in the collective agreement to address racism and discrimination. So the grievance was settled before it could go to arbitration, with the manager being told by her employer that she needed to make some changes in her practice. And I agreed to be as civil as I could. And I went to the next union meeting and they roped me into becoming the ward rep. And that was the beginning. So I became the ward rep, and then later on, somebody felt I had the ability, I could become president of the local. And under duress, I took it on, and I've never given up a challenge. It was a challenge for me, and I stuck with it. And that got me involved for over 20 years doing local work and running for the board of the Ontario Nurses Association provincially.
It took a lot of courage to come forward and file a grievance against your manager at that time.
Yes.
Do you think that that had a big impact on other women who were probably facing the same thing, but just didn't have that push to file their own grievance or to put their
That's
hand up
right.
and say, hey, this isn't right?
Yes, it influenced a lot of nurses. So by then, by the time the grievance was filed and time went on, the human resources, they were trying to make some changes and hire more people of color and Black nurses. And they were having some similar issues. And I remember having to represent them. Now I was actually the president, so I could go down to the management. And it is different in a union environment when you go as a representative for the union and you sit across the table, you're on equal footing. And when you leave the room, you know, they're the employer and you are the employee. So I could go into the room and I could tell them what I think about them. They can't hold it against me. And I represented many, many nurses who felt they were being discriminated against.
But I'm sure you were instrumental in getting a lot of that language
Right?
into the collective agreement, which was really non-existent before. Now, having such a long career in healthcare, I'm sure there were lots of great times. What were some of the happiest times during your time as a nurse? What were some of the most fulfilling?
I remember going to the liquor store to buy some booze for Christmas, and somebody from across the hall in the liquor store said to me, "Hi, nurse, how are you? You look so different with clothes on." I'm thinking, oh, how embarrassing.
Well, we'll just leave
What
that one there.
What he meant was I was not in uniform.
So one of the things that you did was develop some diversity tools for the hospital and for training and education about racism, about inclusion. What was that like to kind of put those tools together?
Through union, we were able to get them to put language, even when a job was posted, to put language in the job posting so that people know that there would be no discrimination in the hiring practices and in the policies and procedures also. Being the outspoken person that I am today, or always have been, is that the doctors would come to the units and they're the gods, just like they were in England. However, my thing was you have to be respectful to each other. So I challenged a doctor one day. He came onto the unit, didn't introduce himself, and he started looking at the patient's chart. And I said, "Excuse me, and by the way, and who are you?" "I'm Dr. So-and-so." So I said, "Well, I have never seen you before." And I said, "You can't really just walk in and look at the charts." I said, "I have to call down and check to make sure that you are who you say you are, because things can happen." And he never forgotten me for that. He said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you for doing that."
So, I mean, I'm sure you've always been, pushing ahead for
Pushing for change, yes.
pushing for change.
Yeah.
Do you have personal motto?
Give a voice to someone who can't speak for themselves. That's my motto. So in being as outspoken as I am, and I learned that from my dad, because my dad he was a sugarcane farmer and he wasn't rich, but he had smarts. He always wanted to help people. And that I admired about him. He would be always helping somebody or speaking up for somebody or taking them to get things from the government and all that. So I learned that from him. Give a voice to somebody who can't speak for themselves.
We've talked a bit about your past and your role in moving feminism forward. Now you're retired, as much as a community leader can ever retire. So tell us what's keeping you busy these days. What's your passion right now?
Well, the day I retired, that evening there was a big party for me, and all these people came to my birthday, to my retirement party, and they all said to me, "Oh, now that you're retired, could you sit on our board? Could you do this? Could you do?" But I had to take time off to. I've been working for 45 years, so I needed to wind down. So currently, I'm involved in the Halton Equity and Diversity Roundtable, and it's a group that, well, just the name alone tells you we're involved in diversity issues. And I'm involved in the advancement of women Halton, advocacy group, lobbying, all that sort of stuff. Some great people on that committee.
So you're definitely not retiring.
No,
You know, it's been an interesting last couple of years. You mentioned your Caribbean connection. It's been tough to get people together, and you know, our country and our community has gone through a lot the last 2 years. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to equity today, as we're coming out of this pandemic?
but it's been challenging for during this COVID time. I remember going to the supermarket. People always looked at other people like myself and feel, well, gee, you should let me go first. So my grandchildren wouldn't let me go to the supermarket by myself, mainly because they worried they wouldn't want anybody to disrespect me. And some of my friends from the different islands, I have a neighbor just down the road from me, and she always says that she gets some of that sometimes.
So, I mean, is there hope that things are going to change, that people will be a little kinder?
Well, we can hope. February is Black History Month, and the television stations and everybody's hosting all these Black History events. But at the end of February, what happens?
Right.
We go back to the same old thing. We shouldn't have to be reminding people that people of color, Black people, other racialized groups contribute as much to our Canadian society as anybody else.
You know, you've been an advocate for so long. And as you look out to the future, to 10 years, 20 years, 40 years from now, what makes you hopeful?
Never give up. Just keep fighting. Because when I think of how things were, let's say when I left Trinidad and went to England in the 1960s and where we are today, if people like myself and others around didn't keep plodding along, moving forward, we wouldn't get here.
Yeah.
So as long as we're alive and we're able to speak and speak for others who can't speak for themselves, things will change. Things will change. I'm hopeful. I am very hopeful.
Do you have any words of advice for young women, especially young women of color?
Get involved. Don't allow people to take advantage of you. Speak up. As long as you believe in what you're doing. And I've gotten into trouble many times, and I do remember. I should tell you the story. This is one of the better stories when I was in England. Then I knew I was definitely an activist then. I told you about the food, how bad it was.
Yeah.
And one day we decided to have a sit down outside the dining room. I organized all my friends. And my boyfriend at the time brought me food and we shared. I got a call from the matron's office, took some of my friends with me, and we went up. And although I didn't have a list written down, I had several things I wanted to tell her. And By the time we left, I had gotten everything I wanted. So after that incident, the matron told me, she said, I think I'll have to let your father know what you're up to. I said, not to worry, matron. I already told him.
What did your father think of all of this?
Never told him. I just had to keep the matron quiet because I was already in trouble. The hospital provided uniforms for us to wear. My own was halfway, so it was like a mid dress. But it wasn't doing, I didn't look good in it. So when nobody was looking, I had it altered. So she said, and go to the sewing room and have them lengthen that skirt. It's too short. That's not how we do things around here. I said, yes, matron. Never went because it didn't do anything for me. I mean, like, and then after that, then everybody started complaining about the length of those dresses. It wasn't flattering.
So you started shortening your skirt way back.
Way back when. So those were some of the good moments, and I knew that I was going to be an activist, that I would get someplace.
Yeah. So you have kids and grandkids now?
Yeah, I have a daughter and I have 2 grandkids, 2 adult grandkids. They keep tabs on me.
What do they think about their grandma?
I'm cool. They said you're the coolest grandma ever.
Do you think it's easier for young people in terms of diversity and inclusion now than it was when you were coming out?
Yes, I believe that the kids today born into, kids from Black families or families of color or any racialized group, unless somebody points out to them that they're different from the others, they don't see that difference at all because they all went to the same school, they all hang out as friends, so they don't see the same barriers they don't see life through the same lens as we did.
So that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. That's progress.
Absolutely. There's still lots of progress to go.
But it's not done yet. We still have lots to do.
Yeah.
And the protest in Ottawa has really flagged some things that are happening to this country, and it's really sad, very sad.
So what do you think that we can do as individuals to kind of combat that?
That's a difficult question because I thought we were doing fine here in Canada, that with everything that's been happening in the Indigenous community, and the government has been accepting that there are lots of people to blame, that we were getting somewhere. And then along came, I do think that there's a lot of across the pond influence, and that's all I'm going to say, influence in Canada. And that is too bad that this has to happen at this time. Canada, no matter what is happening in Ottawa right now, I think it'll be settled and we will move on. And Canada is still a very good place to live. It is. We have public health care. We have so many things that other places don't have. No matter how I feel, and if I feel uncomfortable sometimes, I go down the street. I could still go down there and come home and not feel threatened.
When you look back at your career and all of the things that you've done to, make things better for other people, what do you think of as your greatest accomplishment?
That's a loaded question. My greatest accomplishment is doing what I've been doing all along, being a voice for those that can't speak for themselves. Really.
You're not one to ever really let yourself take the spotlight. You kind of always deflect and say, "Oh, well, it's a group of us," or, I think we can all clearly say that you've been an inspiration to lots of women and people of color to kind of come together and try and create a different world.
But you can't do things alone. I could try to do something alone, but I believe there's power in numbers, and therefore you should take people along with you. They're to support you and guide you and help you along the way. So I never say I did this or I did that. I did it all would help.
Did you ever feel like giving up? Did you ever have a moment where it was like, this is just too much, I just need to stop?
If I ever get like that, I usually take a step back and say, what's my challenge and why am I feeling this way? And there must be a way around it. So I regroup, as they say.
That's very inspirational. Any final thoughts for our group today who are, the Women of Halton Action Movement's been doing this event. This is our 19th year doing the dinner party. Any final comments, Ancilla?
So I jotted some notes down this morning because I didn't want to forget anything. I just wanted to say some thank yous and so forth, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to say thanks for inviting me to share my story and on this International Women's Day celebration. I've attended many of the IWD dinners and dinner parties since its inception many years ago. The last one was in 2020, and the very next week, we went into lockdown, and here we are, still in lockdown, restrictions in one form or the other. One of the things that I've always been in awe of is the number of attendees at those events and the caliber of speakers. And to think that I'm now going to be added to the list of those keynote speakers, I never thought in this lifetime. So I'm so honored. So I just wanted to say that the two agencies that are benefiting from the fundraising for this on dinner party, Service is one of them, and Service is one of those groups that I'm very, very familiar with. I worked very closely with them when I was working in the sexual assault and domestic violence treatment center at the hospital. The best time of my life in my whole working career, because again, there I was able to help individuals who were in a situation that they couldn't speak for themselves and they needed support. So I was their voice. I helped them to heal by listening and believing. And so I worked very closely with Service. And as for the Afghan women, more than ever, they need help because of this new government.
Absolutely.
I wanted to thank WAM for leading this event every year. It's been great. And to my friends, Daniela and Bev, who convinced me even when I had so many excuses as to why I wasn't qualified. They said to me, you have a story to tell, Ancilla, so you tell it. And even in my own house, I got outnumbered when I started to make excuses why I wouldn't do it. So thank you.
It's great to hear the amazing things that are happening right here in our community, and the wonderful women who are at the forefront of them. And thank you so much for joining
Karyn.
us. It's been really great to hear your story, and we can't wait to have you at our live event, fingers crossed, next year in March.